I thought the music in the 70s was much more interesting than the music today.
The decline of the Roman Empire is what happened in the 70s, I think.
Hey, hang on, the 70s had a lot of good stuff. Every decade has good stuff.
There were a lot of good contributions that were made, and there was a lot of crap too.
There's an awful lot of sort of disco crap and other stuff, as there has always been.
But now, you know, I look back at the 70s and I find things that were really very good.
The great stuff from the Eagles.
ZZ Top.
Stevie Wonder, Fleetwood Mac,
Frank Zappa,
Sly and the Family Stone,
Little Feat,
Bob Marley,
Leonard Skinner, Roxy Music,
Rod Stewart,
Led Zeppelin,
Marvin Gaye,
Aerosmith,
Bob Seger,
Elton John.
I started in the 70s, for Christ's sakes.
What a healthy time it was for music, and there was this huge circle, 360 degrees of each degree being a different musical category. It's wonderful.
And it just got to be more music. You know, it used to be you had to be pretty big to make an album. But suddenly there were albums by people I'd never heard of.
I really believe that in the 70s, it was a great combination of fashion, artistic sense, songwriting. It was an incredible time.
Musically, it just seems like the 70s, everything was an excuse for a party.
we're just having a party.
It was okay to have a lot of money. It was okay to flaunt it.
Everybody had an airplane.
Beautiful women anytime you wanted her.
Then came the cocaine, then came the booze.
Jack Daniels.
Cognac.
Budweiser.
Don't ever drink anything that you can't see through.
Nobody knew that everything was bad for you yet, or that could cause you to crash your car, or you're going to have to go to rehab for that one, you know, and on and on. It was a great time to be alive.
You're everlasting summer, you can see it fade fast. So you grab a piece of something that you think is gonna last. Well, you wouldn't even know a diamond if you held it in your hand. The things you think are precious, I can't understand. Are you reeling in the years, stowing away the time? Are you gathering up the tears? Have you had enough of mine?
The 70s was the time when music blossomed. So many different styles and so many ideas. The artist had developed the ability to create an income to allow him some freedom. It was definitely a fun time. A lot of the bands that I was involved with, the Steely Dan, the Doobie Brothers, bands like that, used that time to experiment.
There were so many different aspects to music, what was being appreciated, what was actually being invested in by record companies.
In the 70s, the one good thing about it was I would write like 10 new songs, go and record them, give them to a record company, and they go, oh, it's great. And then, you know, no politics or anything, and it'd just be, and if it did well, which luckily they did, most of them, it'd be up in the charts, and there'd be no political kind of, well, you know, we don't hear a single. You know what I mean? That sort of thing, that's which they do now a lot, to lots of people.
A band like Steely Dan probably we couldn't get arrested now. Because they said, well, what format are you in? Well, are you AC? Are you AOR? Are you CHR? Are you CHS? Are you FBI? You know, I don't know.
Are you reeling in the years, stowing away the time? Are you gathering up the tears? Have you had enough of mine?
The music of the 70s was very, very unique because it was reaching for origination. In other words, you didn't have to. There was no groups of artists copying each other. Everybody was reaching for their own originality, and so I found that very interesting. And also the standards had not been set. They were like new standards, so everybody was going for new things.
There had been enough time in the rock and roll timeline to be able to draw from that. And there had been enough rock and roll, the three-chord guys. There was the rhythm and blues and the blues of the 40s and 50s. There was the jazz era. There had been enough rockabilly, there had been enough country music. So now you have the wellspring. You can draw from a lot of different things, and a lot of the bands in the 70s did that.
I'd like to introduce Led Zeppelin to you. On bass guitar, John Paul Jones. John Paul Jones. On drums, John Bonham. Lead guitar, Jimmy Page. And myself, Robert Plant.
I think one of the most exciting things about the music of the 70s was it was a hybrid of what came before it, but it staked its own territory. What Cream was doing, what Zeppelin was doing, was taking blues and pumping it up on steroids and doing something that changed the nature of the beast.
See, the miracle about Zeppelin is for four people to come together like that, and this alchemy that actually occurred there was just something. It was something that was, you know, it was written in the stars, you know, that it had to be.
Chemistry is another one of Page's sort of philosophical overview terms, I guess. It was just luck. And the fact is that it worked really, really well. I'll give you all I've got to give. Whatever it was pretty honest, a little devious, and certainly not adverse to a little bit of thievery, musically. However, you know, we're not the first people to have done that. My vocal performance comes from everywhere. Whatever I listen to that I like, Ray Charles's Howl on Drowning My Own Tears, or Wynonie Harris or Louis Jordan, there's loads and loads of stuff. All that stuff, you throw it all in a blender and throw the switch and you got me. Why don't you get yourself together, baby? I'm sure you gotta fall.
I remember listening to the first Zeppelin albums, and it was like such a great a breath of fresh air for someone to be doing something acceptable, but yet so different, you know.
I haven't liked a single thing that they've done. I hate the fact that I'm ever even slightly compared to them. I've just never, ever liked them. It's a real problem for me because as people, I think they're all really, really great guys. Just never liked the band, and I don't know whether I've just got a problem block to them because they became so much bigger than The Who in so many ways in their chosen field, but I'd never liked them.
The bands that were alternative then, you know, like the Jeff Beck Group and Led Zeppelin, those are the alternative bands really to the pop bands like the Beatles and the, you know, the early Stones. I mean, they were like the pop idols, you know what I mean? And then these bands that were coming in playing the blues and that kind of stuff, that was the underground rebellious music.
Now you consider everyone's all jolly and tiptoeing around, stoned on acid, having Woodstock and all love, peace and sex and drugs and rock and roll and all that's great, yeah. But for us guys that were living in this hole in the world, it wasn't that way. And Tony Iommi said to Wonder, wouldn't it be interesting to put this horror vibe to a musical thing? And then we started to write doomy music, we used to call it, of this death music, this doom music. never forget when I got the first Black Sabbath album and I took it home to my parents. It starts with rain and thunder and it's all this demonic devil stuff. And I can see my mother and my father look at each other in amazement, and they both simultaneously turn around to me and says, Ozzy, are you sure you're just only drinking the occasional beer here? I hate the word heavy metal because it's like, what musical connotations does it have? What's heavy metal? Lead? Where does the music come there?
It would be unfair to say that anybody who sings in the band thinks that Led Zeppelin was ever hard rock or heavy metal, because at least a third of our music was acoustic.
To me, it's basically all rock and roll. Some people play a little faster, some people play a little slower, some people play louder. It's all basically really based on the blues.
Writing the blues, different people write different ways, but it's real easy to clutter up, especially when you're going for a blues type structure in the song. I mean, like, if you want one cluttered up, send it to me. I'll be glad to do it.
I'm dying.
It's difficult writing blues. I mean, it would seem like it would be just real simple, you know. And I mean, you either get it just real trite, or it gets real congested.
Our band started out a lot of ways. The way we evolved was instrumentally with the jams. We did a lot of jamming. We would set up and we'd play and we'd play and we'd play, and then we'd listen to Miles Davis, John Coltrane, and then the old blues cats, Robert Johnson and people like this.
There were a lot of bands back in the early 70s that did relate to our music a lot. Marshall Tucker, Charlie Daniels, Leonard Skinner. But nowadays it's not really fair to call the Allman Brothers a Southern rock band anymore.
Rock and roll was pretty much born in the South. So was the blues, a certain kind of blues anyway. And saying Southern rock is like saying rock, I guess.
I'm dying.
The rock and roll white boys had blues, which I never would have thought would be happening. So we had to find a new music, and to me the tempo of blues, right in the middle of rock and roll, you know, the midway point is funky music. You know, it's not fast like rock and roll, and it's not all the way slow like the blues, but it's basically the same 3 chord changes.
Everybody funkin' and don't know how. They should have seen the bull when he funked the cow. Funk so hard they saw some smoke. He said, let's get in the bed and funk like folks are laughing at you.
We went back to like James Brown, the 2/4 thing and just a basic groove. You couldn't define exactly what it was, so we call it funkadelic.
Ain't nothing but a party, y'all. Let's get it on.
2/4 is basic dance music. James Brown told us the 1 was more emphasis put on it. The 1 is like that. You can hit it on this end early. You can hit it in the middle, which is what most people try to do. Or you can hit it late, but it's still in that time zone of the 1. We were like the last second you know, right behind the beat, you know, but hard. And we did it to a point till it was cartoonish, you know. So we exaggerated till it, you know, till it's animated, you know, and then with the costumes and a spaceship, you know, it knocks your head off. You walk around flinching to your
Just do that stuff. I do that stuff. I do that stuff. I do that stuff. I just do that stuff. I do that stuff. I do that stuff. I do that stuff. I just do that stuff. I do that stuff. I do that stuff. I do that stuff. I just do that stuff. I do that stuff. I do that stuff. Do that stuff. I just do that stuff.
In the 70s, George Clinton and Parliament Funkadelics and Earth, Wind & Fire, he was very serious about our music and who we were trying to touch. And I think that's one reason why the music of the 70s has not died, because it has a rejuvenating quality about it.
Get up, stand up, did you hear? Stand up for your right one more time. Get up, stand up, did you hear? Don't give up the fight.
Bob Marley made a great contribution in presenting us with reggae music and creating more of a universal acceptance of it. Well, I think Bob Marley's message was a universal message, so therefore it would touch everybody.
There's nothing that he can't sing about in those songs. So it's the freedom that I relate to.
He was one of those Stevie Wonder types, true to the middle of the road. He didn't favor no sides of things. It was just people should be together no matter what.
What is your special message?
Truth, peace, and love, and music, you know, and liberty.
Sick and tired of your hissing schism. Time to go to heaven in a hissing schism. We know and we understand. Almighty God is a living man. You can fool some people sometimes, but you can't fool all the people all the time. And now you see the light. You stand up for your right.
I met Bob quite a few times. We used to joke, you know, a lot, because every time I saw him, he always have a spliff with a big old brown paper bag, and I'm like, that paper bag would choke me to death, you know. I don't mind the weed, but that paper bag hurt.
He wanted everything at the same time and was everything at the same time. Prophet, soul rebel, Rasta man, herbs man, wild man, a natural mystic man, ladies man, island man, family man, Rita's man, soccer man, showman, shaman, human, Jamaican.
The 70s was a very significant time for black musicians because a lot of things had been wrestled with, you know, and kind of settled in everybody's mind by that time about having the courage to just go straight ahead with what your energy is about and go for it.
To me, Sly was an intellectual version of James Brown and Motown. Hey man, how in the hell can anybody get soul music to be that tight until it's pop and still have as much soul as the old-fashioned blues singers? He's by far one of the most brilliant songwriters there ever was.
He was a genius. To be able to conceive of all different types of music and to fuse it into one thing and to set new standards at that time, because prior to Sly, black musicians didn't sell a lot of albums. Mostly sold single records. So when Sly came along, it kind of broke that chain.
There was a concert I went to, I never forget, I went to a Sly and the Family Stone concert. The whole place was rocking, stupidly rocking. And I always wanted to have my concert be like that. I said, God, I said, I'll know I will have really made it to the top when my concerts do that.
Stevie Wonder, little TV. We've watched Stevie grow up, even before we got to Motown. He was so frisky when he was little, and, you know, he used to always jump when he was performing, you know, doing like that. We used to say, okay, Stevie, keep it up. So you better get somewhere and sit your little butt down, okay? You know, I ain't gonna do it, I ain't gonna do it. Stevie jumped one time, jumped right off the stage. Okay. Then we tell you to get somewhere and sit down.
The interesting thing about Stevie Wonder is he broke away from the Motown mold. He matured to the point where he said to Berry Gordy, I got to do what I do. I want to create my kind of music.
Stevie Wonder, going back to Talking Book, he was playing all the instruments himself and playing synthesizer. It was great.
When Stevie was recording like 150 to 200 songs during this period, and he did 4 of the greatest albums I think he ever did in his life, you know, Innovisions and all those great things, and he just fell in. And I remember there was these 2 synthesizer players, Bob Markleff and a friend of his, and they had this huge, monstrous array and depth of synthesizers. In old-fashioned days, you had to put in plugs, and they had cards like telephone operators had to plug in, and they called this thing Tonto. That was the name of it. And Stevie just did some of the most miraculous things, and then from there on in, you know, the synthesizer became another child that was a part of the vocabulary.
In the 70s, the artist had the opportunity to take the time in the studio to spend the time that he deemed necessary to really, really do his or her art, whether it was self-indulgent or not. I mean, Steely Dan used to take me 6 weeks just to find a comfortable chair at $300 an hour. You know, it was pretty silly.
The biggest problem with recording studios is the surfeit of options. There are far too many things.
Can I just hear the new Mellotron sound, please? That wasn't really quite exaggerated enough.
There's always an oscillation of attraction between going the whole hog with studio technology, which always goes over the top at some point. You know, the music of the early 70s was actually fairly tedious as a result of people suddenly becoming possessed by the idea that they were symphonic composers.
What do you know, and I found that was the most interesting aspect of the new music that we were doing at that time, was actually working with synthesizers but throwing the manuals away so that we had no idea how the damn things worked. And it was the mistakes that they made that we found more interesting than the stuff that they were supposed... Because these things are programmed by high-tech buffs who really don't have any sensibility of what can be done musically, so they put in the stuff that they believe musicians would want to use. And that's the stuff that you really don't want to hear because it's like fake strings and things like that. So if you get the wrong circuits going, you get all these crackles and farts coming out of these things. I mean, it just produces the most extraordinary sounds and different range of textures.
There is music that is sacred to us, and that's what's caused this attitude in the studio. You know, an album like Sgt. Pepper, well, everyone thinks they have a Sgt. Pepper in them somewhere, you know. But if there is a Sgt. Pepper of the 70s, you'd have to say that Dark Side of the Moon was it.
We were thinking in the 70s, as we do today, of making great records, which means an album to me. I mean, singles seem like part of a different business. We all believed in were aiming for the same thing, which is perfection, you know, of every piece of music being magical and and uplifting and wonderful, and the lyrics doing whatever particular job they were doing to that same extent. So, you know, we were working towards a common goal.
We run back and drop in a bit? Yeah, you can if you like. Just turn it down a bit.
Dark Side of the Moon was done at Abbey Road Studios. At some point during the proceedings, I don't remember exactly when it was, Roger came up with the idea of making it a piece about madness and all the other things that it's about. I think that I sort of tend to bring musicality and melodies and all that sort of stuff. Roger was certainly a very good motivator and obviously a great lyricist. Roger was much more ruthless about musical ideas, where he'd be very happy to lose something if it was for the greater good of making the sense of the whole album work. So, you know, Roger would be happy to sort of make a lovely sounding piece of music disappear into sort of radio sound or something and sound really awful if it was benefiting the whole piece.
Can I put this down?
He wanted to use, you know, the ideas from the songs to get responses from people, and we wrote out a series of questions and got people into the studio, and we interviewed roadies and Jerry, the Irish doorman at Abbey Road. Question like, when did you last hit someone? And then the next question would be, were you in the right? And would you do it again if the same thing happened? And question like, what does the Dark Side of the Moon mean to you? Of course, understanding that the Dark Side of the Moon was not yet the title of the album, or not as far as anyone was concerned. So they were actually asking people, what does the other side of the moon mean to you? And which is why Jerry, the Irish doorman, said there is no dark side of the moon, really, it's all dark. Stuff like that, which when you put it into a context on the record, suddenly develops its own much more sort of powerful meaning. For me, rock and roll just means that there aren't any rules, and it's just whatever you want to do, however you want to do it. People say it sounds so professional and so slick. I'd have to argue with that even today. I wouldn't say that my technique or some of the others' techniques were particularly in the brilliant era. If you're talking about technique, we were really crap when we started. I mean, we really were pretty chronic. We didn't have any technique at all. Like I say, it should be anything you want it to be, rock and roll. If it's moving any people in any way at all, then it's doing its job, I guess.
You raise the blade, you make the change, you rearrange me till I'm sane.
In the 70s, I don't know if you can pinpoint it exactly what was happening, but I think a lot of influences were coming together and they were becoming refined. And a lot of the groups you would find would spend months doing a record, which was, at that time, unusual. And Queen certainly brought in, I think, unconscious influences. You know, we were all brought up, contrary to the way people are brought up today, we were brought up with all this kind of show-type music around us and with a lot of classical music around us. So when we found that we had all these incredible tools in the studio to use, we used them to make something which was parallel to an orchestral arrangement, I suppose.
I see a little silhouette of a man. Scaramouche, will you do the fandango? Thunderbolt and lightning, very, very frightening me. Galileo.
Bohemian Rhapsody itself, Freddie would normally come in with notepaper and he would write out the chords that he wanted to sing. So Bohemian Rhapsody, Freddie had a lot of pages of these things and we went, oh, this is going to be, take some time.
If we make these harmonies, then we got another 2/4 harmony.
We had this kind of technique which we called the sausage machine. We would sing a line all together in unison and again, so you have 3 of those, and we bounce it to one track. We then do the next part, 3, bounce that to one track, the next part, and there would be like 3 or 6 or 9 parts sometimes. And so by the time you finished, you got a lot of voices singing those parts.
Beelzebub has a devil put aside for me, for me, for me. So you think you can stop me and spit my eye?
If the 70s represent something which became refined, I think the best of the 70s had the balance. You had groups who were able to make, in a recorded work, something different and special, but were really excellent at performing on stage. So the two skills became parallel but different. And certainly, if there was a criticism that people weren't putting as much raw energy in, I think you had to be there. I don't think it was really lacking if you were in Madison Square Garden or the Forum at a Queen show or an Aerosmith show or, a Zeppelin show or... I mean, it was, for me, it was very gut-wrenching.
When I walked on stage at night, I said, well, tonight I have this opportunity, to maybe reach somebody the way that I felt like I was reached when I was, 15.
I still get butterflies. I mean, I don't need any laxatives, because before that intro music goes on, I'm on enough that came like a fiddler's elbow.
We had a mission, and our mission was to go out on stage and make sure that we made believers out of everybody.
Go on, guys. No, it's great. No, it's not an exit. It's not an exit. We don't want an exit. No, that's true. Let's not lose it, though. Let's not lose it. What the fuck is he? He should be here.
You go right straight through this door here, down the hall.
Yeah.
Turn right.
Yeah. This way. This way. Straight right. Go. There we go. Hello, Cleveland. Hello, Cleveland.
What you talk about things you know mighty well. What you wearing out things you know mighty well. What you call my name, but I gotta make clear. But I can't tell you, honey, where I'll be next year. So I sweat on the mama with a face like gems.
You definitely get a buzz being up there. You can very much get caught up in what you're doing, and trip all over everything. You got to keep one eye open and one eye shut. I always liked those people that kind of looked a little aloof and floating around. And for myself, I got to dance around monitors and speakers and wires, and enough of the arguments with the people to tape it down. If they can't, they don't. And better for me that I don't trip and fall over.
But you never know what to expect. I mean, the strangest of things. The strangest of things happen in the middle of a show,
I'm out there on a cherry picker, that huge long arm which reaches out over the audience. Oh, the times that thing took, it took like half an hour to get it back again. And one night it would just break down and it was just stuck out there. And I finished Space Oddity and I put the phone down. And I just didn't know what to do, because I'm just still stuck out there, and all the audience are down there, and all these hands are coming up. And what do I do? Do I do the rest of the show out there? But that was the early days of rock theatre, I guess. And so many of those dreadful escapades.
We were supposed to breathe fire, and I really wanted to hit the ceiling. Of course, the ceiling was 40 feet up in the air, but in my mind, I could reach it. And so the fireball that came out of my mouth was too big. And on the very first show that we did on a big stage, right side of my face caught fire, the hair and everything. I later realized that if I didn't spray my hair with hairspray, it wouldn't catch fire, because the stuff says clearly, flammable. Gene Simmons, this means you.
Somebody threw a chicken on stage. This was in Toronto. And I'm from Detroit. I've never been on a farm in my life, And I said, a chicken, it's got wings, it'll fly. So I threw it back in the audience. I thought it was going to fly away, in the sunset. It went right into the audience, and the audience tore it to pieces. And threw the parts back up on stage. Now, the next thing I knew, it was Alice Cooper bites head off chicken and drinks the blood and tears the face, and all this stuff, And that's what the paper said the next day. And I got a call the next day from Frank Zappa, and he says, "Did you do that?" And I said, "No." He says, "Well, don't tell anybody that." He says, "They love it."
The beauty of the 70s was there was no MTV. That not saying that MTV's not any good. But if you liked a band or an artist or whatever, you had to physically go to the gig. So there was more excitement. I'm going to go and see Led Zeppelin tonight, or I'm going to go and see the Rolling Stones. We used to have incredible acts opening up for us. I mean, there were bands that were great bands, you know, and you got to go on and follow them. I mean, when Kiss opened up for us, there was flames leaping out the stage, and there's us four guys walking out. How can we ever top that, you know?
You show us everything you know. You keep on dancing when the food gets hot. You drive us wild, we'll drive you crazy.
Kiss believed the show was the end-all and the be-all of everything. It should be overkill, you know, just everything, too much, overload of senses.
The makeup just evolved. Gene was crazy about horror films, and he came up with this demon persona. And what made it believable was we were really Kiss World.
They did that stuff, and the audience loved it. I mean, they ate it up. It's like big-time wrestling, you know? It's like the spectacle. And we were like shaking our heads, you know? We're just trying to play music, you know? And we're going, what are we going to have to do now?
About a year and a half into our existence, we were playing stadiums. It really exploded big time. That's when the makeup really seeped into, I don't know, American consciousness. That's when we became trapped a bit by the makeup. We couldn't go to restaurants. Our heads were wanted. Initially, it was, you know, exciting, and then it got to be, you know, a little bit sort of too much. There were Kiss movies, and the pinball machines, and the garbage pails, and you name it. They wanted merchandise, they wanted toys, we'll give you toys.
This is Kiss, each sold separately, and you can put them in any crazy pose you want.
They were the first band I ever saw have dolls, have games, have all these side things on. I mean, those guys took it to home, man.
I think rock and roll for the longest time was boring, especially the American bands who were fat and ugly and didn't really care about their appearance. In fact, I remember going to see a lot of the San Francisco bands, and they literally turn their backs to you and play like that. I thought it was the biggest insult. I'm saying, what am I buying a ticket for? I could stay at home and put on the record. What are you turning your back to me for?
You know, everybody was a little bit tired of peace and love. Everybody got tired of this, and everybody got tired of, yeah, man. You know, something needed to happen that was a backlash to all that placid, you know, laid-back thing, and we hit it with everything. I would like to think that Alice Cooper opened the doors to theatrics. We were sort of the band that drove the stake through the heart of the Love generation. We were just a rock and roll band with a lot of good ideas, you know. It had a little Vegas in it. It had a little Broadway, but it was really rock and roll. The average kid had no idea what to think because he'd come in, he'd see the show, and he lived in Columbus, Ohio somewhere, and he'd walk out of there going, "What was that?" That was like a truck hit him.
I thought it was nuts. I was just so blown away when he hung himself, and and he also had some good songs,
I don't care about anybody else that sort of pulled off the makeup CD trip. I mean, he was like the first one. He was rock history for having done it in the first place, and he was the only one that ever has been able to pull it off and do it, so it was really cool.
I played the part of Alice. I created him, and I don't know where he comes from, to be honest with you. I know that if they say 20 minutes to stage time, everybody leaves, and then I turn into Alice. And then after that, for the next hour and a half, nobody gets near me.
The older that I get, the more that I realize what kind of escapist attraction there is to taking on the role of somebody else. As I've been through that. I love theatre. I thought it was great, and I thought there was a way of doing something exciting with the stage and rock. The idea of a prefabricated rock star, one that didn't exist, a sampled rock star, I thought was kind of cool. The time that I really, I guess, put it all together and really tried to make it work was on the first tour of this character called Ziggy Stardust that I developed. The theatre elements were somewhere between Clockwork Orange and kabuki theatre. Just these, grab this and grab that. A real rag bag of information that didn't actually make any real literal sense. In interviews and stuff, I would just either quote James Dean or Nietzsche. It didn't really matter, because all the ingredients that went into it, people would interpret that, and I'd agree with them.
He represents it all to me. Excitement, space. See, I'm just the space cadet, he's the commander.
I thought, golly, what power. Gosh.
Shining answer.
I let the whole thing trickle over into my life to such a degree that it affected me dramatically and traumatically for quite a few years during the 70s.
Yes, I had a kind of a strange psychosomatic death wish thing. Because I was so lost in Ziggy. It was all that schizophrenia.
How much did Ziggy's death have to do with his own personality or with the circumstances in which he existed, or with the...
Yeah, it was his own personality being unable to cope with the circumstances he found himself in, which is being an almighty prophet-like superstar rocker who found he didn't know what to do with it once he got it. Which is, it's an archetype, really. It's the definitive rock and roll star. It often happens.
I don't think anybody can really prepare themselves for fame on the level that we've had. When you try to think about what it'll be like to be famous, you can only comprehend it within the scope of what you've experienced or what you know to be out there. It's so beyond that. There's hot and cold running women, drugs, alcohol, food, limousines, jets, and you very quickly begin to believe that that's the way to live.
We're pampered beyond belief, us, rock and roll superstars. And I still like to get pampered. I'm not being hypocritical, but not to the degrees that we prance around and we're very, very spoiled.
I never tie my own shoelace. Never. That's not the thing done in rock and roll.
Ironically, you become a rock star because you don't want to do what people tell you to do. It's the classic thing. You want to rebel. You want to have control of your own life. What happens is, if you get extremely famous, you lose that control again because so many people are looking for pieces of you.
And you suddenly, you got friends you thought you'd never have,
Hi, fellas! How you doing?
A lot of people show up, and you have to kind of sort out why they've shown up.
Yes, Bobby Quacker.
Like suckerfish, those people on the sidelines, lawyers, managers, everybody's starting to call you, hey, babe.
Everybody wants to start advising me what to do, and I get confused,
This is it. I got it. I fucking have it. Because it plays off that. There was this author a few years ago. Her name is Anais.
We couldn't work out how these people had those jobs and how they possibly retained them, because such an awful amount of them seem to be such complete dickheads.
Artie fucking Polymer Records, how are you? I'm your promo man here in Chicago. Oh, that's great. I love you guys.
When you're allowed the self-indulgence of being anybody you want to be and having somebody tell you that that's okay, it's very frightening. And in a lot of ways, your art will suffer. I think the 70s was the time when that danger became most apparent, because that's really when everybody started making a lot of money. And when you have money, it buys you influence. When you have influence, it buys you power.
Well, fame in the 70s, it's like equals power, and you have the power to get what you want. You know, so I mean, we used it to party.
You know, we were the Toxic Twins, and we had to, live by night and not by day, and we slept all day, haha, and isn't that marvelous? And it was fun. When I got sober, I got pissed off that I didn't make love to all these women. I was in the bathroom with, this guy and that guy, and this girl and that girl, and just, filling my nose and filling my arms, and I really didn't get a chance to revel in it.
The torture of fame and success and lots of money is not a subject that's guaranteed to win an awful lot of sympathy with other people, I can tell you that.
It was fun for a long time because it was just me and the boys and our jet. How cool could that be? If you're a millionaire at 20 years old and you're unattached, you don't have any responsibility except to have as much fun as you possibly can. At least that was the idea in the 70s. I think there's more of a social conscience now than there was then. At that time, it was just have fun.
Can be very privileged existence. I don't mean in terms of money, but I mean in terms of really like what you get to spend your time doing. I live a very privileged life, and I've always thought it was my responsibility to talk about to talk about life as it is for everybody. I mean, if I want to write songs everybody can understand, then I can't be writing songs about living behind a wall in Bel Air. In my music, I use a personal narrative to talk about things that, in final analysis, are more or less universal, hopefully. If I'm doing it right, then they're not just about my life, but about your life, too.
Looking out at the road, rushing under my wheel. I don't know how to tell you just how crazy this life feels.
It's put in my mind very early on that you should discover yourself and find out what that is and bring that out, and that's what people would be interested in, what you have inside, what you have to say. For me, writing songs is like collecting or harvesting the residue of a life. It's almost what happens when you later take your experiences and reflecting on them, arrange them in some order.
A lot of the blues players came from very poor, dirt poor backgrounds, and they had this gift of singing about the human element, which was a lot of it was despair, and making people laugh at it.
A lot of stuff came out of anger, being in a rock and roll band. It's how do you do it? You don't punch your wife or get drunk or throw your Rolex. Write a song about it. I'll fix your ass.
Loving you isn't the right thing to do. How can I ever change things?
At the time that we were doing Rumors, there was this rather unusual situation within the workings of the band where you had two couples that were in the process of breaking up during the making of the album. So you had all this cross dialogue going on.
You can go your own way, go your own way.
You had John McVie and Christine McVie breaking up. You had Stevie and myself breaking up. Go Your Own Way was a song basically directed at Stevie.
Go Your Own Way was Lindsay talking to Stevie or not talking to Stevie. It was basically On Your Bike Girl. Whenever that song was at its peak, that was Stevie and Lindsay playing out whatever roles they were playing out. I mean, some heavy stuff went on with that song.
The Rumors album went way through the ceiling, you know, and at some point became a phenomenon in which the sales and the success of it really became disproportionate to what the music itself was. I always perceived it as having something to do with the fact that it was kind of a musical soap opera, and I think all of that came through. I think the emotion of that, the truthfulness of that came through on the grooves.
The Rumors album turned into a freak, really. We weren't going to complain about it because we really all the interviews would go, well, how much money you made? That's what, 15 million albums now. But we got through it, and then we went into a situation where the likes of Peter Frampton, the Bee Gees, a lot of these bands were selling a lot of albums, big numbers that hadn't been done before.
Frampton Comes Alive was released in January 1976, and it became this ginormous record-breaking record and became the biggest selling record of all time.
The 55,000 that showed up today at Anaheim were there because of only one person, the 26-year-old Englishman whose name is magic enough to have all these rock fans standing out in the hot sun from 1 in the afternoon to 8 o'clock tonight.
There were quite a few boom years there. There were a lot of people who were realizing that you could make a ton of money off of concerts on a large scale. We were certainly in the middle of that until the bottom dropped out of that, which was not a bad thing.
The way I think that Frampton Comes Alive changed the industry was that it made everybody realize that there were a lot of people out there, more people than usual, that could buy a record. There's a bigger audience out there than they thought, which turned it into a much bigger business almost overnight.
Frampton Comes Alive was the first sort of generally recognized multi-platinum album. And when people realized you could make that much money selling records, they became disinterested in fringe artists. You know, people within the industry became disinterested in fringe artists, started investing everything in these sort of mega platinum artists. And that amount of money also attracted, corporations that had no essential interest in music. You know, they had only interest in money-producing enterprises of any kind. Gulf and Western started buying up record companies, and therefore record companies started being run from accounting offices rather than from A&R offices.
It was a new game, a new, as you would say, new ball game.
There was the corporate thing in the 70s where people were making, big stadium shows, and the music didn't seem to be quite as good as it should have, or it didn't seem to be being made for quite the right reasons. And you were having certain things that weren't that good just thrust down your throat.
Time to get some records on the radio. We have a shot this week. The album is a smash. There's such a buzz going on. Out of sight. It is a monster.
That was the beginning of that.
I mean, there is this adage in the business that if something works, run it into the ground.
Here are 10 Frampton albums for the jocks.
There are very, very few moves in popular music now which haven't already been plotted out and considered by some major corporation who will put the money behind them. There are not many accidents.
I mean, they got to the point where they was putting
things on you to measure your heartbeat to see what songs would work. When you try to do music like that, when you try to put it on an assembly line as a commodity, it changed every time.
Up until that live album came out, I'd always just sat down, you know, wherever I was, wherever I'd gone to write, and written for myself. I knew I had to write an album, but I was basically writing stuff for my own enjoyment. Then Frampton Comes Alive comes along, and I go, oh my God, what do they want now? And all of a sudden, the way I was thinking about writing changed. There was a pressure to write for other people instead of myself.
I mean, the only way artists can do things is to do it for themselves. And trying to second guess what the public wants or likes is kind of a fool's game.
Hey, thank you.
When it got to the 70s, ourselves, the Earth, Wind & Fire, some of the other Sly and Family Stone, who was influenced on all of us, had music where you can dance and it was still rock and roll. You know what I mean? It was dancing. And so we went on and on into that. And as the funk band started coming out, they really started dancing. And that became money for the companies. The companies tried to isolate the part of the record that worked, that made it dance. So your first notion is that it's a drum beat. But the mistake is that it's no one drum beat. When they start isolating to one drum beat and one sound, don't nothing get on your nerve more than some rhythmic that's the same thing over and over again. I mean, it's like making love with one stroke. You know, so to tell you to fax that in.
Young man, there's no need to feel down. I said, young man.
And the machine age sort of took its revenge, I think, on music. And disco music became the antithesis of what music used to be, which was a way to communicate. The music, instead of being an anthem or instead of being a voice, became an accompaniment. It was almost the anthem of alienation. Halls were full of people who were mindlessly dancing to a rhythm that was basically a machine.
It's fun to stay at the YMCA. It's fun to stay at the YMCA.
I think that it was kind of hard for the white people to get into R&B music because the beat is so sophisticated and hard for, you know, for the kind of dancing that white people are used to doing. This clearly defined beat that is so apparent in disco music now makes it easier to learn to do what, you know, our kind of dancing.
Young man, are you listening to me?
And go, right foot in front, right foot, left foot, right foot, left foot. Having fun?
Most rock and rollers that I knew had a real problem with disco.
I like a lot of disco music, but I detest most of it. And I hate disco. I really hate it.
I just remember disco and hating it so much.
Number one, you could do it all on machines, so you didn't need any people. And that put a lot of people out of work.
The record companies wouldn't give us a second look. So what we really didn't have any choice other than play disco music, and we weren't about to do that.
Disco got so big, and it was generic. I think the record companies didn't have to deal with the personality. They didn't have to give those big contracts like they had to do with the rock and rollers. They made it real big.
With rock and roll, it was a drastic, violent reaction to disco.
A huge box containing thousands of disco records was blown up. Fans stormed out onto the field in the thousands. Disco records were hurled like frisbees. Bonfires were set. Fistfights broke out.
Our goal in the 70s was to destroy disco. You know, we wanted to see that. We saw that as a terrible menace to music.
Nice, Dan. Go. What you need, man? Chopping up the old drum machine, are you?
You know, we have to remember that the most important thing about rock is the attitude. Because, you know, it's not supposed to be really good.
We got something, we both know it. We don't talk too much about it. Ain't no real big secret all the same. Somehow we get around.
I think Petty's great. Refugee is the most amazing sounding record. Talking about kicking the door open, you know. The great thing about Petty is the simplicity. He's a great songwriter.
Damn the Torpedoes was very important for me because in the writing I found a jumping off place. You know, I found like, okay, well, this is what I do. Because you don't know. You do some of this, you do some of that, and then suddenly, oh, this is what we do. And this is our sound. This isn't the Byrds or anybody else. This is us. You know, the good thing about rock music, in my mind, is that it'll go for a while, and then it'll get very predictable, and then they're just bound to shake it up again, you know? And I love the little times when they shake it up.
Why don't you know that?
In the 70s, I suppose I was aware that there was a connection with the fans, the people that came to see you. There was a greater connection to be made than was being made at the time. When we went to do our show, my idea was that this show should be part circus, part political rally, part spiritual meeting, part dance party. You had to go back to the physical in the end, I always felt, you know. It was like, it sort of began with the physical and you're supposed to end with the physical.
I have seen Bruce, yes. It's a long concert. It was very long. He's excellent, he's very talented, but that was when he obviously didn't have anywhere to go after the show. He just played for about 5, maybe 6 hours. It was rather long.
How I ended up playing that long, I'm not really sure, you know. It sort of just happened, you know.
I can't stand no more!
In the end, the idea was there would be some sort of, you know, physical liberation and you know, sort of, you know, you get their ass moving and the spirit will follow. You know? Also, playing to the point of exhaustion was important to me.
The No Nuke show was a lot of fun, and our slot was immediately before Bruce Springsteen, who was headlining that night. It was his birthday, I think. And people were yelling, "Bruce," you know, all night long.
Too bad the guy's name wasn't Melvin or something, you know?
And Jackson Browne, at the side of the stage, he says to me, "Now listen, if you go on and you think they're booing you, don't get thrown, because they're really just saying Bruce." And I said, "Well, what's the difference?"
The 70s for me was a time when I felt really grounded in the music that I was making. For me, that was a decade when I was sort of, you know, just kind of telling my story, focusing on what I thought that might be, what it might be about, trying to not make the mistakes that I'd seen some other people make, you know, or slip into, not get distracted by too many of the different types of choices, and keeping basically the idea of the music and the audience in front of me as the essential thing and as the thing that gave my own story meaning, you know. I didn't see myself as some gifted genius type of guy. You know, I felt I was a hard-working guy. You know, I worked really hard at learning to play, and I worked hard at learning to write and sing, and I always felt like, hey, I was the guy in the front row or the third row that picked the guitar up and got on stage, you know.
I'm just a prisoner! Of rock rock and roll!
I think it comes down to the performer and the audience, and that's what it's about in some fashion, you know. And it can be any room. I've had great nights in the old clubs in New Jersey where you felt as alive and heightened as in any big place you ever played. When it happens, there's some direct recognition of some sort of mutual humanity, you know, and a good time is had by all, you know.
I think music changed when Bruce Springsteen came on the scene. I think if it wasn't for Bruce Springsteen, we may have gone in a very scary direction. We may have gotten to the point where disco music ruled, and then I would have had to quit.
My fellow Americans, our long national nightmare is over.
Just let me hear some of that rock and roll music. Any old way you choose it. It's got a backbeat, you can't lose it. Any old time you use it. It's gotta be rock and roll music. If you wanna dance with me. If you wanna dance with me. I have no kick against modern jazz, unless they try to play it too darn fast and change the beauty of the melody until it sounds just like a symphony. That's why I go for that rock and roll music. Any old way you choose it. It's got a backbeat, you can't lose it. Any old time you use it. It's gotta be rock and roll music. If you wanna dance with me. If you wanna dance with me. Don't care to hear them play a tango. I'm in the mood to dig a mambo. It's way too early for the Congo. So keep a rocking that piano.